All right, so we've talked about my Maya settings. Now let's kind of go a little bit more in the animation settings. Um, Here's a auto key. This will basically, whenever you move things, it's going to drop a key, but you have to make sure to set a key first. Here's, if you were using audio, we're going to use that. Here's a caching system. I've been turning this off lately. It's been seeming to slow down my machine. It's kind of hurting my machine over helping. So sometimes that will be turned to blue. I usually turn it off. And this is frames per second. I often work in 30 frames per second, not 24. Not going to really hurt you at this stage of the game, but something to be aware of. And then you have your play button. You reverse it, play it in backwards, or stop, jump to the next game. Well, I'm going to go over a little bit more of what these ones do next, once we actually do a little simple animation. So let's just create a simple object so we can understand these aspects. Let's create a box. All right. I'm going to hit W to move. And then I'm going to drop a key, which is hitting S. Dropping a key drops a keyframe. Everything turns red. Now I can start moving it. If I move it and I scrub, nothing. As you can see, it pops it right back to this spot it was at, because that's what I'm telling it to be. If my auto key was turned on, I would move it, and then I could scrub, and it would be there. And I can move it back, or I can move it. I went down the timeline to frame 55. Now when I scrub, it's telling it to be on frame 1 over there, and on frame 55 over here. If I turn this off, come further down the timeline, move it back, scrub, it goes right back and it doesn't drop the key. Turn it back on, drops the key, now we got motion. So you got to be very aware if you're going to be where you are at. Are you here when you change things? Because sometimes it's very common to be a little bit off and you push it further and all of a sudden it kind of creates that weird motion. So knowing exactly what frame you're on, it can be very important. As you can see, I just deleted it. So if you move it, right click, delete, and it's back to where it's at. All right. I'm going to drop a key there, 150. I just hit S. So this plays it, as you can see. This one will jump to the next tick, the next keyframe. You can see it come all the way through. This one will jump to the next frame. And this one will jump to the very last frame. And vice versa. On this side, it jumps to the very first frame. This one goes back a frame. This one will go back each tick. Pretty simple. Last thing I want to go over is your timeline down here. As you can see, this is your timeline. This under here is kind of like your workspace in your timeline. Sometimes you have a very long scene. I've worked with a scene that was over 5.5 minutes long. It's a big scene that you're working with almost 10,000 frames. As you can see, 30 frames is 1 second. So that's 1 second. So 10,000 frames is a lot of frames. But what does this mean down here? So I can actually select this bar and move it. Now I'm at frame 250 and 101. And I can move it right back and all my keys are there. It just kind of hides your workspace. I view this as, this is my, like in a sense, this is my desk and this is my room that I'm working in, the whole space. So it allows you to focus, like you can have your entire scene blocked off from 1 to whatever it is, 10,000 or 1 to 60 or 1 to 30 or 1 to 10. Matters how big how long your animation is going to be. But if you're working on a larger scene, like over 200 frames, you may only want to work with, say, a couple seconds, 3 seconds, about 90 frames. And so you work in this area. It's a lot easier to work with less in front of you than the whole thing in front of you. So that's the benefit for here. You can kind of click this and drag this, or you can change the numbers here. I can punch in 100 and get exactly 100. And if you change the outer one here to like 60, it'll actually kind of compress it, as you see here. One other kind of nice little feature to know, if this is smaller and you want to see the entire scene, all you have to do is double click on the gray bar, and it will go full scale. If you double click again, it goes back to where it was at before. So that's some basic manipulation for the animation and timeline kind of stuff that you will often deal with. The other small thing that's easily overlooked and not often talked about is manipulating the box. You can, as you can see, you can translate. If I rotate it and I want to move it forward, I still move it forward. But what if I wanted to go at that angle this way? That's the object orientation, not the world orientation. Right now we're set to world. If you just double click on your translation, you can go to axis world to object. Now I can go up in that direction. That's the X for the object. You can do the same thing for rotation, but honestly, rotation, I usually always leave it to object. I don't ever switch it to world, because if you use the outer blue constraint here, it is kind of the world for the camera, or if you're in a different side view, that'd be the world for the front or the side. So I never use the world for the rotation, but for the translation, I jump between world and object often. But more often, I leave it to world because I want up to be up. All right. So there's a little extra information about the timeline and the manipulator. One last little bit. If you hit the minus and plus, that will grow your manipulator. So something to know. Hopefully that is helpful.